Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to the Packet Hacking Village. It is now the top of the hour, 3 p.m., and it is my absolute honor to introduce to you the man of the hour. He is a security consultant out of Chicago. And so, what else? God, I know a lot of your colleagues are in the audience, and actually, I know some of your folks as well. It is my absolute pleasure. You're going to really enjoy this talk to introduce to you Elliot Brink, or what I call also known as Brinkster. He's going to give a talk on Honeypots. So, without much ado, Elliot Brink, everyone.
Where do we put this thing? All right. Check. Hello, Defcon. How are we doing today? Yeah. Yeah, better? All right, much better. All right. Hello, Defcon. My name is Elliot Brink. Today we're going to talk about global honeypot trends. It's going to be, you're going to get some information, a little bit of comedy, tiny bit of sarcasm. User bin whoami. My name is Elliot Brink. I am a senior penetration tester at McGladrey LLP, soon to be RSM in October, going through a rebranding. I perform internal penetration testing, external penetration testing, and quite a bit of social engineering as well. I am honeypot crazy, as most of my friends and coworkers would accept that fact and agree. And I'll be available for questions after if time is cramped. I want to make sure that the next person has enough time to get set up. And just as a general disclaimer, all words here are my own and do not reflect the official views of my employer. So here's a quick 10-second agenda. We're going to talk about what a honeypot is. We're going to talk about why people run them. And we're going to spend the majority of the time talking about my research and results, initial results for the first couple months, a little bit of a foray into the study of the attackers and methods and techniques. And then we're going to conclude by talking about some of the global trends when we compare systems in the US versus systems abroad. So, introduction to honeypots. So a honeypot is an intentionally vulnerable or fake system designed as a trap for potential attackers. Generally, there is no good interaction with a honeypot. Generally, I would say outside of the scope, the majority of the time it isn't good, any sort of interaction with this system, but the kind of one-liner that I use is just because it isn't good doesn't mean it is bad. It is an event, it should be analyzed, but generally it's designed to, any sort of interaction with this type of system is generally questionable and should be investigated. Traditionally, they are used on the external facing side of the network. However, there are usage cases for internal honeypots. I don't cover those in this talk. And there are very good detection of attacks aside from your traditional IDS and firewall. So why do we run them? The first reason, personal, fun. I think the best reason to do this. Again, corporate. You have the detection of attacks outside, aside from traditional IDS firewall. Internal detection scenarios possible. And they're heavily used in academia to study malware abroad, charting for specific attackers or originating from specific countries. So I'd say boil these down to the three general uses. So enter Kippo. So Kippo is a medium interaction SSH honeypot written in Python and based on a prior honeypot called Kajoni. It emulates SSH login and a full Linux system. So obviously it's running on port 22. Someone can hit it. If they log in correctly with the username and password, they can run kind of a quick little set of some generic Unix commands. It records all of the username and password guesses in a MySQL database, and it also records the user interaction. So you can see you can do a play log and actually watch as the attackers type, or if the commands are running really fast, then it's obviously a script, and you can find it on GitHub. However, for the purposes of this talk, I use my original Kippo version. In the past couple months, a new version has come out, and I wanted to just mention that for future reference for anyone who years later interested. It's called Cowrie. It is based on Kippo, but it has a couple of added features, such as logging with JSON, SFTP is allowed, and there is that. Also, when you're running this honeypot, obviously you have all the data either in a text log or in a MySQL database. You need something to be able to, consolidate all these numbers and data into a visual diagram for you to see. I use Kippo Graph. You can find that on, I'm going to butcher his name again, but Yaris. There's also Kippo to Elasticsearch that is quite cool. And a more recent one called Tango Honeypot Intelligence lets you send the logs to Splunk instance, which lets you filter and manipulate the data quite good, actually. So here's the start of the project. So I started this back in January 2014. I had a Raspberry Pi lying around, and I think I was reading like a Lifehacker article or something similar on good uses for Raspberry Pi, and Honeypot came up, and I thought, okay, let me give this a shot. Because it's great because it's a low-powered device, it's perfect for single use, and Raspberry Pis are fun. After installing Kippo, I liked making a couple little pieces of customization. Quite often, attackers go in and look at the CPU info and mem info, and by default, I think it emulates just a basic laptop with a couple of gigs of RAM. I actually had a buddy who worked at a big IT firm, and I said, hey, can you give me a CPU info and mem info of like a big Linux server? He's like, how big? And I was like, I don't know, 48 gigs of RAM. He comes back to me, he says, here's a CPU info with 4 10th core hyper-threaded processors and and a terabyte of RAM. I'm like, all right, that'll work. Change the host name. Pick your favorite core banking provider. So I won't list any, but etc. Pre-logon banner, lastly. Want to give something juicy for the attackers to look at before they're logging in, assuming it's a manual attacker. Mine says IBM banking server version 7 or something, complete gibberish. So here's the first 3 months. 250,000 password guess attempts, about 40 to 10 correctly guessed root/12356 per day. But something interesting to note about this graph, you'll see the initial spike at the beginning. It's very clear from this graph that there are groups out there that are very, very, very good at detecting when new hosts hit the internet. And they're able to tackle this system and get on top of that, enumerate it, save the data for later. And then the rest is just general grind of the internet that's always constantly going on. Here's the top 10 usernames attempted. So root's obviously the heavy hitter. We got admin and FTP. But can anyone see the third one? The username is root/*12345, comma period. Do we know why that's the case? Because someone was using a combined username and password list and obviously wasn't using Hydra correctly. So this ended up as the username and it was guessed 233 times. Bravo. Hydra is hard to use. Top 10 passwords attempted. So we can see, generic admin password 12356. There was one in here in particular that sparked my eye for a quick. I saw, okay, what is this? !QAZ at WSX. That doesn't look like it has a normal pattern or something that would be easily guessed? Well, it's a location-based password. So brute forcing on external IPs with location-based passwords, probably not as clever as we think. Because if you look at the full list of guessed passwords, there's generated pattern-based passwords, location-based passwords, all across the keyboard. So be wary of that. And then the last hop of attack. So disclaimer, last hop of attack, this is the last place where I know that the attack originated from. It could have come from another country prior, but this is the last place that I know that it existed. We have China, 65, India, USA, Russia, Romania. I gotta give credit to France. This was due to like 1 or 2 hosts that were hitting this nonstop, and for some reason did not have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in their dictionary. So they just kept rotating the dictionary and it just kept rotating and rotating. So they screwed up the statistics a little bit because of that, but you know, good A for effort, I don't know. So user input. So this is what I was waiting for. Because obviously a lot of the data that I'm gonna get has to do with brute force attacks. Because once they successfully get access to this system, then they're going to be able to log in and do things. So typically, it's very common to get a wget command, and then they download some file from some strange port and some file name. So once I started to get these, I started thinking, what happens if I hack back? What happens if I just cut off the file name and the folder, and I just start navigating to these places and just seeing what's there? So then it began. So this is the typical situation, or typically what I found about 9 out of 10 times. Something called HTTP File Server Beta, or HFS. Typically had, malware, zip folders, exes, etc. Ranging, from just generic stuff to complicated stuff. This over here is the number of times downloaded. Sometimes I'd run into one that had 20,000 downloads or a couple that had 0. So it's interesting to be able to correlate these based on how many systems they've potentially compromised. So I'm browsing around. This is like one of the first ones that I was looking at. And I see this. I see some hacker note-taking, or hacker notate. It was a nice HTML file. I assumed it was like a UGDevil PHP or some kind of backdoor. No, this person was conveniently keeping track of the IP port, username, and password that they were compromising in the same system where they have their malware. So 500 IPs for me to go consume if my hat was a little darker. So once I saw that, then later I found this. So now I'm getting the same word lists that they're hitting me with. So those are free for me to take. Thank you for those, because now I use those in my pen tests. And then once I found these 2 things, I knew exactly what I had to do. I just had to go and download all the things. I found a Google hack. I did index those as well. This was the string. Now it says about 93,000 results, stale links, compromised systems that would get wiped or fixed. It was more realistically about 100 or 200 that Google had indexed that were still live. And these are some of the findings, and some of them are pretty spectacular. Typically, I'd say the highest thing that I found was Linux local root exploits that are, circa 2007 and 2012. But here's the funny thing. They log in with the root account and the password 123456. They download a local root exploit, and then they run it. So you already have root. There is no root. Yeah. Another thing I'd find, Windows DDoS, just generic botnet exes, compromise, sends traffic. The 2 craftier types of backdoors that I would see are SSH backdoors with Perl scripts, as well as, I'd say the most sophisticated, which was very, very, very few was when people go in and add their own SSH key, which to me seems like a no-brainer, but depending on this, Black Hat's level of expertise, this could be too complicated for them. So here's an example of one of the EXEs that just a random server.exe. I throw it through VirusTotal. It's got a very high detection ratio. I'm glad I don't have any of the 5 AV scanners that didn't detect this for some reason. Detection ratio of 50 out of 55. Obviously prepackaged malware, very easy to detect. Grandma with a 3-month-old, virus definitions would probably not suffer from this. Then I saw this one file named FreeBSD. And originally I thought, okay, they just named it this, but they're probably going to put it, in a Linux system, maybe to blend in. Maybe the sysadmin has no idea what he's doing. But upon further inspection, it's ELF32, Intel, FreeBSD, for FreeBSD 8.4. So some of these people have very basic toolkits, but some of these guys actually had some pretty complicated sophisticated toolkits, which is nice to see. And then the crown jewel. This is only from the first 3 months. Originally, I found a file containing just a text file, just chilling on the directory, just, right next to all the little malware is this text file, and I go, oh, what's this? There's an SSH file that contained 1,000 IPs, ports, usernames, and passwords. Later, a couple months, I found one with 5,000. And about 3 months ago, I found one that was like a couple megs. I look at it, it's got about 80,000 lines in it. So, if you want to theoretically compromise a bunch of hosts, just run a honeypot for a year and that data just comes to you. So it's interesting because you got tier 4s going on here. I mean, if I'm a member of the competing hacking team and I find this, I'm going to be able to take these systems, flip them, and now their portion of their botnet becomes mine. One last note on this, obviously since, enumerating these would be illegal, I would be under the assumption that even if half of the numbers here were correct logons, that is still a lot of systems that you just stumble on. So now I'm going to make the move into taking a look at the interesting attackers. I say interesting because some are funny, some are dumb, some are actually kind of, unique. So we're going to learn the difference between little baby Winnie, Googling how to use Hydra, and six-pack abs Winnie, Googling how to eat souls. Here's the script kiddie, or secretly a genius, but I'm guessing script kiddie. The password is root every time, but the username changes. Again, Hydra, there's a username flag and a password flag. You got to make sure you get the two right, otherwise this happens. This was someone from the San Francisco area, or / San Jose. So shout out to the West Coast. What's going on here? And the success of this is debatable. At least there's no account lockout, but again, this is going to be noisy enough to any good corporation that finds something like this is going to shut this person off very, very quickly. That graph right there shows that I only had 3.5 megabits in, and they throttled my internet connection, and I had to turn off the Pi. You have the everything under the sun attackers. They're using a dictionary/dictionary. This is extremely noisy, and it's going to get picked up in a corporate environment in a heartbeat. I have seen worse attacks, but this is not the best. You gotta minimize your scope, guy. Dictionary, not how it works. I will say this: there are a couple of industries where I could assume that someone is using the username straddle on a server, but those won't be discussed here. You see some interesting coincidence. So these were 3 separate systems that I own. And from the same IP across the entire day, I get the UBNT, username, UBNT, password. So it's interesting when you set up multiple systems, you can actually see one single attacker hit your system, the other system, and the other system, all within the course of a day. So, and then here we have the better attackers. So I give these guys a gold star, good job, because these are targeted, targeted attacks that are a little bit more specific. Postgres, targeting Linux service accounts, accounts that would actually be in existence versus the username straddle. These guys are doing much better. But then finally, we have the bizarre. And I kid you not, this actually happened. This was the username. It was web-footed horse expletive phenomite with the password loldongs. I watched all 9 of my systems. This guess happened across all 9 systems, slowly over the course of the day. If a botnet exists, or if the botnet owner is watching this, please find me, because I would like to buy you a drink, because that is an amazing username and password combination for your botnet. Or maybe they figured out it was a honeypot. If so, well done, because that is possible. So, expansion. I expanded to Russia, Singapore, and as unlikely as it sounds, a China VPS that's actually behind the Great Firewall. It's got all the classic symptoms of being behind the Great Firewall, can't access Gmail, etc. And more sensors means more data. So after adding these other 8 systems, I had 9. I had 5 in the US. I got about 18 million password guess attempts across all 9 of them. And from this, I got about 900,000 unique. I also add in all the dictionaries that I stole from the HFS systems, so that adds a couple extra thousand as well. So with more sensors means more user interaction, and it means a broader range of attackers. So Russia, China, and Singapore. So these sensors were designed to answer a couple of important questions. Are there geographic differences in the attackers depending on the country? At least from the last hop's perspective, so the last place that we know where the attack originated, China is the main aggressor for the USA. If I go and get a system in mainland China, is the USA going to be the main aggressor for China? And 3, does anyone care about attacking Singapore? I know the answer, because the answer is apparently no, because no one attacks that system. I don't know why. So the China VPS Honeypot is I'm talking a little bit about the infrastructure and just kind of things I noticed before I got it, or while I got it. Very, very, very spooky. There were random netstat entries by default. So this was probably something that was just recycled, and they just reset the root username and password and just handed it off to me. A apt-get upgrade signaled the reinstall of the grub bootloader, and it was already up to date. So, I don't know, backdoor maybe, who knows? I'm going to take a second look at this, so maybe I'll get something interesting for another talk based on this. And there were 2 IPs that were constantly port scanning me every 30 seconds. They're owned by a China telecom company, and from what I can imagine is they have the infrastructure to do a heartbeat across the whole network, consistently every 30 seconds. And so China has some strange laws about port 80. You need something called an ICP license for port 80. The reason I bring this up is my statistics program, Kippo graph, utilizes HTTP and HTTPS. You either have to change HTTP for another port, or they just say just use SSL or TLS and you'll be okay. So, okay, nothing on port 80, never. So here is the country per unique IP for the China VPS. So some surprising statistics that I ended up seeing. China remains almost the same percentage as if it was a US system, but then you've got a little bit of chunk in there added that incorporates Hong Kong. France has a significantly bigger attack profile. The USA is about the same, so we've got about 8 or 9% hitting a US system, 8 or 9% hitting a China system, and little good mentions for a couple of the other ones: Germany, Turkey, Italy, South Korea, United Kingdom, Poland. Here are a couple of the honorable mentions. I mainly show this because it points out the fact that there are compromised hosts in a lot of different countries that you wouldn't, think of. And the one that I'm noting one interesting item for each of the international honeypots. What I noticed from the China VPS is there was no real initial surge. So in the prior, we saw a graph that went, up. The honeypot in the USA went up, and then it went down, and just the general grind. Whereas here, we don't actually see that as a trend, which could be just a coincidence, or it could relate to the fact that this has significantly higher numbers of successes per day. So the surge really is difficult to measure. And of course, there's some anomalies, such as that day. It was a bad day for that system. The Singapore VPS. The question I had was, is anyone going to attack a Singapore IP address? Very, very, very few attacks. Most of the other systems have 2-3 million password guess attempts. This has been on consistently, only 600,000 total password guesses, and significantly less distinct IPs versus a USA system, which traditionally had 13,000 or more distinct IP addresses attacking it from its inception. And some other interesting statistics for Singapore versus the China VPS. Hong Kong was the biggest hitter. At 50%, it was very interesting to see Hong Kong as the key player versus China as the key player. Japan at a quarter. Japan really didn't make too much of a dent in any of the US systems, but in the Singapore systems they did, as well as China. And miscellaneous other countries were the remaining 15%. The interesting item about this system, you've got the USA systems, you've got China, Russia, Singapore. One of the things the honeypot keeps track of is how many people do root password changes. So a lot of the times, an attacker come in, just change the root password and then just leave. It seems a little bit abrupt for me. I mean, it's going to set off some it's going to set off some red flags, especially if the system's actually actively being monitored. But the Singapore VPS consistently, about once a week, had root password change. So maybe it has to do with the technical abilities, or those that are attacking from these specific nations. Maybe that's a strategy that they use more than groups based in the US or China. And just as a side note, this system actually validates the initial surge quite effectively too, starting off with basically nothing, and then for the period of basically a whole month, just getting absolutely slammed. 130, all the way down, with a couple of additional spikes to be noted. And then the Russia VPS, decent amount of attacks, 1.5 million total. Distinct IP is actually less than Singapore, so it's kind of along the same lines as the Singapore VPS. And again, primary attackers. Hong Kong had over half of the attacks, specifically Hong Kong IP addresses. The only issue with the statistics for this one is a huge chunk, interestingly, came from IP addresses that had absolutely no lookup values. I was using the MaxMind database, and just a large chunk just came from unknown IPs, and then miscellaneous countries took up the remaining. Oh, I'm sorry. That should be 30%. I'm sorry. Yeah, 30%. 30% unknown IPs, 30%. Yikes. And it was interesting to see this gap in statistics. You know, I have a lot of systems that are attacking this with no known origin. You know, interesting, the GeoIP spread was slightly different than the US IP. It's because it has this concentration of Hong Kong. So, what's next? So I wrote a detailed guide on how to deploy a honeypot, specifically a Kippo honeypot, on my blog and website. It will also, we are working on getting it published on the Wall of Sheep blog as well. The word lists. How many people want the 900,000 word list? All right, well, that'll be on my blog too. We're going to get some more sensors added across the world. I want to get Australia, Belgium, and the UK. I actually tried to get a UK VPS. I made the poor mistake of naming the host name honeypot-UK. My system actually went on, my account went under review, and I paid for it and everything, and I said, where, is my system available? And I just get this one-line question from a system administrator that says, what are you going to do with this system? I was like, oh, I'm a student. I'm just gonna open up a LAMP server and I just don't have a Linux server at home, so I need to, I need a system to test on. And 2 weeks later, nothing. A week later, I'm like, am I gonna get this system? They're like, we can't accept you as a customer at this time. Thank you very much, and just refunded my money. So I got to try again, except be a little bit more sneaky this time. Malware analysis. How many people in this room like to analyze malware? Quite a few. So through this, I have gathered quite a bit. I plan on putting them into some encrypted zip files and putting them on my website. I will release them for anyone who wants to play with them at your leisure. Go ahead. If you get owned and you get a remote connection back to China or some other country, don't blame me. And implementing different types of sensors. Particularly an RDP honeypot and a web application honeypot. I have already deployed a couple of RDP honeypots on the same systems that I have, and I'm actually starting to, I'll give you guys a sneak peek. The initial results that I'm seeing are, I am gathering a really great list of default passwords for POS systems, and I love it. It's great, just feed them to me. Web application honeypots as well, still on the to-do. So I have a slide for some special thanks. Special thanks to the McGladrey security and privacy team. All members of Threat Incorporated, a little cooperative for honeypot, honeypot enthusiasts came together and we came under one name called Threat Incorporated. I want to give a shout out to these guys. A couple, if not most, should actually be here in the audience. Iken Yaros, he's got a pretty good foothold in Kippo Graph. It's how I generate all my statistics. Gurkhan spoke there, love it. If you live in the Midwest area and you haven't gone to Gurkhan, highly recommend. And yeah. So thank you, Defcon, Wall of Sheep. Does anyone have any questions? Any questions? No? Yes. Oh man, I can't hear you. I'm sorry, what? Why didn't I? Oh, well, if you want to know who I used for hosting, come talk to me, because I would rather not reveal that, ethical dilemma. But the system in China cost $70 a year. Most of these VPS systems are actually pretty low specs. Half a gig of RAM, quarter gig of RAM, 1 to 2 processors, 20 gigs of disk space, and like 5 terabytes of data. It's 5. I at max use 3 gigs per system. Yeah. How easy is it to detect? So there was an interesting talk at Black Hat about this. I have yet to take a look at it. But you know, one of the people I actually thanked wrote a Metasploit module that will scan a Kippo system and detect if it's a honeypot or not. So that makes it pretty easy. There are nuances. For example, if someone logs in and types, and this is my favorite example, if you type ifconfig, it gives you, RX, TX number of packets. If you type ifconfig again, those numbers should be different. They are not. And that's like, step one, see if a command that produces two different outputs after you run it a second time, if the numbers are the same, yeah. A second favorite is if someone tries to compile or run a shell script. It's a little blatantly obvious. A little owl pops up and it says, "Oh, really?" And you have to type Y, and then when you type Y and enter, it'll say, "No way," and just cut you out. Yeah. Yes. So double exit feature. So the system that I used had a double exit feature. You have to cut the TCP connection in order to exit the honeypot. If you log into the honeypot and you type exit, it will reset. It will say root at localhost, and people will begin to type commands assuming that they're on their home system or their remote system. I have a couple of those. I didn't discuss any of the results, but they're, it's typically like, hey, let me CD to JDO. So they're revealing a little bit of information about themselves without them knowing. And then they type the command and they see, oh, that folder doesn't exist. And then really quickly I see like a cut. So sometimes they figure it out, sometimes they don't. Any other questions? No? All right. Well, feel free to come and ask me questions. If not, that's it. Thank you, Defcon.